Title: The Secret Coup Ibrahim Traoré, Crushed Before It Even Began. The morning sun filtered through the old trees of Ouagadougou, casting a faint light on the vast square where a statue of a hero from the past stood silently watching history repeat itself. No one among the people rushing to work suspected that, beneath that peaceful sky, a storm was quietly brewing, and its target was none other than Ibrahim Traoré. At an age when many men are still struggling to find their way in life, Ibrahim Traoré took on the fate of a country. Young but experienced, tough but also compassionate, he stepped into the role of leader not out of ambition, but out of duty to the poor people, to fallen comrades, to dreams of freedom that had yet to take shape. Since taking power, he has ignited hope, but also jealousy. Those who lived comfortably off the people, those who secretly colluded with foreign powers, began whispering in the dark. A conspiracy was woven. A sinister plan was nurtured in silence, a coup that was never born, but was doomed from the start. The story begins on an April night, when the city was deep in sleep. In a villa on the outskirts, 5 men sat around a wooden table, the dim light illuminating their calculating faces. They were not strangers. 2 of them had sworn allegiance to Traoré. One had even fought in the trenches with him, shared his meager meals on the front lines. But greed and fear, like poisonous snakes, slowly tightened their grip on their hearts. "He is too young," one whispered. "Does he think he can challenge the real power? We must act before it is too late." Another nodded, his eyes flashing with betrayal. They discussed the details. Create chaos in the army, seize the radio stations, issue a false declaration in the name of the people, all in a single night. A cold plan, leaving no room for error. They were confident because they believed Traoré's youth was a weakness, that he would not be sober enough, not experienced enough, to recognize the danger lurking beneath his feet. But they were wrong. For Ibrahim Traoré, beneath his calm and simple exterior, possessed an intuition as sharp as steel forged in fire. He did not live in lavish palaces isolated from the people. He was among them, hearing the whispers in the smallest alleys, sensing the slightest undercurrent of disturbance. A week before that meeting, a strange signal had reached his ears. A low-ranking officer whom no one had noticed had whispered to him during a routine military inspection, "Something is wrong, sir. Some people are preparing for something." Traoré did not react immediately. He listened quietly, observed quietly. In the following days, he increased internal controls, assigned loyalists to monitor unusual movements. He did not let his suspicions show, did not cause a stir. He knew that once they were revealed, the enemy's plans would change shape, like a snake slipping deeper into the grass. His every move at that time was like that of a seasoned actor on the fraught political stage. Every step was careful. Every nod, every handshake had a double meaning. And then, on a night as dark as the fate of the conspirators, the first evidence was confirmed. Traoré, with the courage of a true warrior, did not rush to shout, did not get angry at the betrayal. Instead, he quietly prepared for a final game, a decisive move that would decide not only the fate of the traitors, but also that of the country itself. Amidst the chirping of insects in the night and the oppressive silence of the corridors of power, a silent battle was being prepared, and the one leading it was Ibrahim Traoré. The entire city of Ouagadougou held its breath that night, but no one knew that in just a few hours, their fate would be decided by a silent and brutal battle of wits. In the secluded conference room of Barracks 3, which had once been the starting point of the liberation campaigns, Ibrahim Traoré stood by the window, silently staring into the dense night. His eyes were no longer those of a young leader, but those of a warrior who had understood the cruelty of power. On the table before him, secret reports were unfolded names, suspicious actions, secret meetings. The evidence was enough. The traitors' identities were exposed. Some were high-ranking officers, some were ambitious politicians. But the most painful was the name of the man he had called Brother Captain Sogo, who had fought alongside him in the fiercest battles. Traoré closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the pain, but also realized the absolute necessity of coldness. The country had suffered enough betrayal. There was no room for softness. The plan was drawn up in silence. There were no shouts, no loud mobilizations, only short orders, transmitted through the most secure channels. The loyalists, the warriors sworn to protect the people, immediately took up positions. The clock read 2 a.m. when it all began. Outside, the city was still asleep, but inside, quick, silent footsteps began to move. At key points, the national television station, the main barracks, the communication posts, the special forces, quietly took up positions, without a single shot, without a single scream. Meanwhile, in the suburban villa, the traitors were busy discussing the final move for the coup. They had no idea that the siege was tightening by the minute. Captain Sogo, with a tense gaze, bent over the map spread out on the table. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, we move. Send a signal to the group in the barracks. Just take control of the radio station and the command post, and everything will be over within 2 hours. He looked up, meeting the eyes of his accomplices nodding in agreement. In their hearts, victory was almost certain. But at that moment, a very small sound rang out the door, swung open. And then, like a dry storm, figures in uniform rushed in. Weapons pointed, eyes cold. Taken completely by surprise, the traitors had no time to resist. Tied up in a matter of minutes, they were led out into the bright headlights that shone like the judgment light of justice. In the encircling formation, Ibrahim Traoré appeared. No weapons, no large bodyguards, only the radiant spirit of a true leader. Captain Sogo, pinned to the ground, raised his head to look at him. In his eyes, there was astonishment, shame, and overwhelming fear. "You," he stammered. "You knew? Since when?" Traoré stepped closer, bent down, his voice warm but cold as steel. "Since the moment your heart turned away from the people." There was no anger, no contempt, only a quiet disappointment, like a cut deeper than any whip. And then he turned away, letting his soldiers take the traitors to the prison van. No one was tortured. No torture. Because in the world Traoré dreamed of building, justice was not blind revenge, but the steadfastness of reason. Back at the main barracks, he summoned all the key officers to an urgent meeting. Under the simple white light of the conference room, Ibrahim Traoré stood before them, with no podium, no glass, separating the leaders from their subordinates. He said, his voice calm, "Tonight, those who should have protected us chose to betray. But tonight, I saw clearly Burkina Faso still has loyal people. People who do not sell their souls for a little bit of fleeting profit." The room was dead silent. His every word echoed like a hammer blow that struck straight at the self-esteem of all present. "We are not only fighting those who hold guns against us," he continued, his eyes scanning each face. "We are also fighting the fear, the ambition, the betrayal that lurks in the hearts of men. Never forget, this country does not need those who seek glory for themselves. This country needs those who put the people first." There was a burst of applause, not the polite kind, but the applause of grateful hearts, of awakened souls. That night, Ouagadougou slept soundly. But in the heart of the barracks, a silent oath was renewed, stronger than ever. Everything seemed to be over. The main conspirators had been captured, the web of conspiracy unraveled link by link. But deep in his heart, Ibrahim Traoré still felt that something was not right. An invisible cold wind blew through his soul, like a vague whisper that the game was not over. He barely slept the next morning. In the intelligence department, amid the thick reports and the piles of data, Traoré searched. He searched for the smallest details, phone calls, secret meetings, suspicious transactions. And then, in a faded file buried among dozens of others, he found what he was looking for, a brief exchange between a high-ranking officer and a figure who had never been revealed. The man had never been investigated. He was not on the list of traitors last night. A sixth hand. The silent but sinister presence of a puppeteer from behind the scenes, so that when all attention was on the captured masterminds, he could quietly clean up the mess and rise from the ashes. Traoré clenched his fists. He understood. If he let the man escape, the danger would not only return, but be multiplied. No one but him could end this game. Immediately, he left the barracks with his two most loyal guards. No noisy escort cars, no sirens, just the three of them, on a hunt like a wild animal that had tasted blood. They followed the trail through old alleys, through cramped markets, to an abandoned building on the edge of the city, a place where only the most desperate dared to live. And there, in a decaying room, they found him. Not an unfamiliar face. He was General Amadou, once one of Traoré's closest advisors. He sat there, by an old radio, broadcasting distress signals across the border, perhaps to foreign powers, perhaps to mercenaries waiting. A call for reinforcements, a new spark in the struggle for power. When Traoré entered, there was no gun pointed, no stray bullet, just two Menone who had trusted the other, now facing each other amid the ashes of betrayal. "Amadou," Traoré said, his voice strangely calm. "Why?" General Amadou raised his head. There was weariness, bitterness, and a deep sadness in his aged face. "Because, Ibrahim," he chuckled, his voice bitter, "you want to change too quickly. Do you think ideals can feed those who are used to eating off the heads of their people? Don't you understand? This country, this world, will never accept someone like you." Traoré did not answer right away. He walked slowly, closer. The distance between them was no longer just a few meters, but an abyss of ideals and betrayal. "I understand," he said, his voice like a knife cutting through the darkness. "I understand that there are people who choose to surrender rather than fight. There are people who would rather bow to corrupt power than believe in the possibility of change." Their eyes met a look that was no longer hateful, only cold regret. Traoré signaled for his guards to step forward and handcuff Amadou. There was no struggle, no cry of injustice, only quiet acceptance. As Amadou was led out, the light of day fell on his face, and for the first time, the people around him saw clearly the true face of one of the most respected men. The news of the arrest spread like wildfire. The whole city woke up. People poured into the streets, talking, bustling. Once again, Ibrahim Traoré had saved his country, not just by military might, but by the courage to look the truth in the face, no matter how painful it was. The gentle morning light fell on the streets of Ouagadougou, shining on every alley, every house still soaked with the sweat of a long night of restlessness. But this morning, the city was no longer immersed in anxiety. The murmurs of last night had given way to spontaneous cheers. National flags were hung along the avenues. People gathered in the squares, their faces lit up with a mixture of relief and enthusiasm. They knew, they felt it. A storm was extinguished before it could drown their fragile hopes. And the one standing in front of that storm was none other than Ibrahim Traoré. That morning, not by order, not by force, but by faith and pride, tens of thousands of people voluntarily poured into the large square in front of the presidential palace. They did not come to demand, not to protest. They came to pay their respects, to witness, and to make a vow. Ibrahim Traoré, in his simple military uniform, faded by the sun and wind, stood on a rustic wooden platform. No colorful lights, no long speeches. Just one man, a heart burning for his country, and a sea of people waiting for his words. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd. Before him were faces of all ages, mothers, soldiers, children clinging to their parents' hands, their eyes wide and sparkling with hope. He took a deep breath, and then, in a deep, steady voice, it echoed across the square. "Last night, we won, But this victory was not mine alone, not the army's. It was the victory of those who never gave up on believing in what was right. The crowd was silent. Each word seemed to be engraved in each person's heart. There are those who believe that power is something they can barter, trade like a commodity. There are those who believe that we will kneel in fear. But today, we prove one thing. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Our freedom is not for bargaining. The cheers were thunderous. Traoré raised his hand, signaling for everyone to quiet down. Fighting for your country is more than just holding a gun. Fighting is about maintaining your dignity when you are tempted. It is about standing firm when you are threatened. It is about believing in your own worth when the whole world calls you a fool. He paused, his eyes burning with a sacred fire. I do not promise you that the road ahead will be easy. I do not promise that we will be rich tomorrow. But I promise, as long as I stand here, as long as there is blood in my heart, I will never let this country kneel before any power. Applause, chants of his name echoed throughout the square. Ibrahim, Ibrahim, Ibrahim. And then, like a flood of emotion, the crowd raised their right hands, shouting in the local language and French with the same oath. For freedom, for the people, for Burkina Faso. In that moment, there was no longer any distinction between rich and poor, no more ethnic or regional divisions. They were one people, one heart beating for the future. Ibrahim Traoré looked down silently. A rare smile, pure and sincere, spread across his lips. Not the smile of a victor, but the smile of a man who had made the right choice, chosen to stand with the people, despite all the dangers. He understood that difficult days were still ahead. He knew that the dark forces would not easily give up their ambitions. But now, he was no longer alone. He had an entire nation behind him. The sun that morning seemed even brighter than usual, illuminating the image of a young leader, his hand on his chest, his eyes fixed straight ahead, a silent promise. Burkina Faso would never bow its head. And so, amid the pounding drums and the sacred oaths that echoed across the sky, a new chapter of history was written with courage, with faith, and with undying love for the motherland.